Good morning, everybody. I've been following this Vice Admiral Mark Norman case since 2017. It broke in 2017, and well, maybe even before that. But this case has lots and lots of twists and turns, and I didn't know a lot of the background, and I found a really, really good National Post article that really lays it out, and we're going to go through it, and I'm going to try and do it justice. It is so many twists and turns just to get the basic understanding of what's happening with this. But this is a really big story, and it might be influential in next year's election. And it's really underreported. Manny Ottawa is right. So let's get to this. It's going to be a bit long, so buckle up. Sorry, I'll do my best. But I think it's worthwhile to spend the time on this. Okay, so Manny Ottawa is tweeting, quote, "More vile hypocrisy by Trudeau. Government ran on transparency. Canada's Vice Admiral Mark Norman is in criminal trial. Trudeau will not release documents. Blames Harper. Harper said release all to help defend Admiral. Media silent. Trudeau complicit." Okay, so that's a lot to set up. And this is a huge article. It's a really, really big article. And I want to give you an idea of what's going on. What happened? What are they accusing this man of? This guy was the second in command of Canada's Navy under General Vance. And they just removed him from office, removed him from that position 2 years ago. And from what I can tell, he was just doing his job. And it got a little politically hot. And yeah, there's more to this story than is being reported. There's more to this story than I'm reporting because I just don't know it yet. But man, this is either going to blow up or, like a whole bunch of other things, just go away. Danforth shooting anybody? Pedestrians being run over in Langley, anybody? BC? No, nothing about that. No names and no motivation, no motive. Nothing. Okay, anyway, back to the article. This is long. Let's go. All right, a federal judge has pointed out that there's been no suggestion that Norman received monetary compensation or any other, quote, personal advantage for what he is alleged to have done. Hundreds of pages of documents offering insight into the RCMP's investigation of Norman, unsealed last year after a court challenge by media organizations, including Post Media, offer no challenge to his apparent motivation. To ensure that, in the face of political considerations and procurement uncertainties, the Navy actually received a vessel it sorely needed. Skipping down. Norman has still never officially been provided the reasoning for his unprecedented removal as Vice Chief of the Defense Staff. He has never received a military hearing on the matter, and there has been no independent examination of the facts of his case. Though Prime Minister Justin Trudeau publicly and boldly predicted Norman would end up in court, and we'll look at that, the claim made against the sailor have not been tested by a judge or jury. At this point, it's unclear whether they ever will be. Skipping down again. How did the second in command of Canadian forces end up in limbo for a year with no end in sight? While Norman declined to comment for this article, Post Media has compiled this account of events from court records, from documents obtained through the Access to Information Law, and from a series of interviews with multiple sources in the Department of National Defense and the defense industry and involved in or with knowledge of the Norman case. Okay, so supply ships must be the least glamorous vessel in the fleet, but they're critical to the functioning of a proper navy. They make sure warships have enough fuel, food, and ammunition to continue operating, and without them, a maritime force is limited in how far from its country's shores it can travel. The Royal Canadian Navy has been trying to replace its two aging supply ships since 1999, but those efforts kept falling victims of lack of political will of Canada's infamously ineffective military equipment procurement system. Sorry about that. Skipping down. But those vessels would be years away from service, blah. Even as the Conservatives made their last attempt to solve the Navy's supply problems, behind the scenes, Mark Norman was warning politicians the government's shipbuilding plan was sailing into stormy waters. Norman comes from a military family. His father had been an Army Major General, but the younger Norman had been drawn to the sea. In 2003, he was given command of the HMCS St. John's, a Halifax-class frigate. 6 years later, he was named commander of Canada's Atlantic Fleet. In June 2011, he was promoted to Deputy Commander of the Royal Canadian Navy, and 2 years later, he had command of the service. When Norman was appointed to lead the Navy, it was in dire straits, as the Vice Admiral would warn in 2014 naval business plan which Post Media obtained via an Access to Information request. Quote, "Limited resources, financial and human, and competing priorities continue to test our ability to most effectively and efficiently deliver our mandate," he wrote. "I have made and will continue to make some very difficult decisions over the short term to effectively rebalance the resources assigned to coastal formations. One of those difficult decisions came in late 2014 when Norman ordered the removal from service of the Navy's only two supply vessels, the HMCS Protector, which was a burned out hulk after being crippled by a fire earlier that year. The HMCS Preserver, more than 40 years old, had become unsafe to operate because it was literally rusting away. Vice Admiral retired Peter Cairns, another former head of the Canadian Navy, would point out in a 2015 essay that the loss of the ships effectively reduced the Navy to a well-armed Coast Guard unable to form a task group without the assistance of foreign nations. Norman laid it out on the line for MPs during a November 2014 meeting on the House of Commons Committee on National Defence. Quote, "The retirement of current refuelers and the delay in the construction of joint support ships have led to capacity issues, which have a ripple effect," he said. "Owing to the capacity issues, Canada is unable to support and maintain those ships at sea if it needs to deploy them elsewhere." Canada's Navy was put in the embarrassing position of having to strike a deal with Chile and Spain, two nations willing to lease some of their supply ships to Canada, but only for short periods. In January 2015, a federal government approved a new plan that could provide at least a temporary solution. It would lease a supply ship from a private firm. Proposals for such stopgap measures were received from Irving Shipbuilders in Halifax, Seaspan in Vancouver, and Davie Shipbuilders in Lévis, Quebec. Sorry if I said that wrong. I did say that wrong. Back to the article. Considerations, both practical and political, led the Conservatives to choose the Davie proposal. The Irving family's pitch was rejected for a variety of reasons, including concerns their shipyard wouldn't be able to work quickly enough, according to the RNC officers. There was also the view that Irving, which under the National Shipbuilding Strategy had already been selected to build the bulk of the RNC's future fleet, had more than enough work to last their Halifax yard for decades. Jumping down, the Davies proposal was the attractive policy to the Conservatives, as the shipyard was located in the riding of Conservative Cabinet Minister Stephen Blanley. With the country about to go into a federal election, the Conservatives hoped to deal with the Navy's ship problem while potentially gaining votes in Quebec by providing work to a shipyard that had been passed over for work on the federal shipbuilding program. Dubbed Project Resolve, the deal was a gamble for Davie. The project was valued at $670 million and would see Davie and its affiliates buy a vessel, a commercial container ship launched in 2009 called the Asterix, owned at the time by a Greek shipping concern and sailing under the Liberian flag, and converting it into a supply ship to the Navy's specifications, providing civilian crew for 5 years and maintaining the ship over the same period. However, Davie would receive no money until it delivered the ship to the government. What's more, the Asterix was considered only an interim supply vessel, so the Davies deal offered the Quebec yard only a limited role in federal shipbuilding. Nonetheless, the Conservatives' deal ruffled feathers in the country's shipbuilding industry and in some corners of the federal bureaucracy. According to industry and government sources, neither Irving nor Seaspan were happy at the decision to give work to a rival shipyard, one they saw as a potential threat to their hold on future government work. Some federal bureaucrats also saw the Davie deal as a threat to the federal shipbuilding strategy, according to documents Post-Media obtained via access to information, and voiced concerns within government that Davie's role needed to be limited. On the first day of August 2015, Jason Kenney, the defense minister of the day, announced the government had signed a letter of intent with Davie for the interim supply ship project. Shortly thereafter, Norman began regular email communications with Spencer Fraser, a former RNC officer who headed Federal Fleet, the Davie affiliate that would oversee Project Resolve. So like the general, well, the guy overseeing it, right? And in Canada, small and tightly knit defense community, it's common for senior military leaders to be in touch with the industry official whose firms provide the Canadian forces with equipment. So what I was just about to say was this is standard practice for Canadian people and procurement, right? Like if you're getting something built, you have to tell somebody what you want, right? This is part of the process. This is the second in command of the Navy talking to the guy overseeing the shipbuilding, right? This is an important relationship. Okay, back to the article. Norman and Fraser had served together and had known each other socially, meeting from time to time over the years. After Fraser left the Navy for an industry job, Norman continued periodic communication with him, as he had done with other Navy officers and former colleagues who went into the private sector. That communication ceased during the selection process for the interim supply ship, according to industry sources, because of Fraser's involvement with an active bid. Skipping down a bit. Many of Norman's initial emails after the bid was awarded reassured Fraser that those in government understood the importance of the project. Though Davie had purchased the Asterix, which had arrived at the company's Quebec yard in early October 2015, and though several hundred workers were standing by to begin the conversion of the vessel, the country was in the middle of a federal election, and the crucial next phase of the project, the government approval, the conversion was in political limbo. On October 8th, Fraser emailed Norman to give him an update on the project. He outlined the type of communication gear to be used on the Asterix and the upfront engineering costs and the price tag for the crew and the vessel lease, as well as the annual maintenance costs. Fraser told Norman that he had met with the NDP, who had voiced support for the Project Resolved. With the Liberals edging towards forming a new government, Fraser also said he planned to meet party officials to confirm their support. Norman sent him an encouraging email pointing out that there was consistent support within the federal government for the ship. On October 19th, Canadians elected a Liberal majority, sending the Conservatives who had instigated Project Resolve to the opposition benches. But neither in the Navy nor in the federal bureaucracy was the change in government seen as a stumbling block for the project. During the campaign, the Liberals had promised to rebuild the military and reinvigorate shipbuilding. Project Resolve would seem to have helped them deliver on both those promises. My sense is that there's little risk of the contract being not being supported, Norman reassured Fraser. Jumping down a little bit. But several weeks later, the situation changed. On November 15th, Fraser was informed that a member of the CFN Consultants, an Ottawa lobbying firm affiliated with one of the Irving's partner companies, was predicting that Project Resolve was doomed. 2 days later, a letter from James D. Irving landed on the desks of 4 members of the new Liberal cabinet: Syjan, Finance Minister Bill Morneau, 2 politicians from Atlantic Canada, Procurement Minister Judy Foote, and Treasury Board President Scott Bryson. In his letter, Irving accused the previous federal government of having pursued a sole source deal with Davie and claimed his company's competing proposal was never properly evaluated, a situation he now wanted the ministers to rectify. The government's reaction to the missive from the powerful Irving family was swift. The next day, the Privy Council office and officials had a teleconference with DND procurement staff, asking them who, other than Davie, might be able to provide the Navy with the interim supply ship. The same day, November 18th, 2015, Norman emailed the country's top soldier, Chief of the Defense Staff General John Vance, to tell him about the questions being posed by the Privy Council's office. Such queries were not totally unexpected, given the new government was now in place. Norman acknowledged, quote, "Equally, however, this could be concerning. It took us almost 18 months to get to this point," Norman wrote to Vance. "Perhaps you can mention that to MND." Jumping down a little bit. A federal cabinet committee met the next day. Norman didn't attend as he and Vance were in Halifax for a security conference, but sources told Post Media that Defense Department Deputy Minister John Forster, I think that's Forrester. Anyway, Lieutenant General Guy, I'm not going to try that one. Sorry, Lieutenant General. Then Vice Chief of Defense Staff and second in command of the Canadian Forces were at the meeting. The outcome, a cabinet decision to put Project Resolve on hold for at least 2 months. Cabinet's decision to delay Project Resolve sparked a flurry of emails. In the Navy, some worried that a temporary delay turned into an infinite delay and eventually allow the program to be scuttled. Jumping down. On November 19th, Fraser emailed Alex Weisfield, head of Inocia, an international shipping conglomerate that owns Davie, as well as John Schmidt, a Davie official. The subject line read, quote, "From Mark." The email contained lines regarding Project Resolve contained in quotation marks. Quote, "Positive interpretation could be government just unsure and asking questions. Cynical view could be folks manipulating new government to try and kill it. Not sure what the truth is." All emails in this story are quoted as they were written. So any quotes that are like that are exactly what was written in the emails. Okay, back to the article. Fraser also told the Davie executives that then CBC journalist James Cudmore had heard rumors about the Irving letter from somewhere inside the government. So this could get interesting, Fraser added. The same day, Fraser sent another email to Weisfield with the subject, quote, "From our friend." It contained a statement in quotations. Quote, "I can tell you that Irving did stick their nose into this and sent a letter to multiple ministers, including Bryson, a couple of days ago, that no doubt contributed to the problem." Skipping down a bit. Officials at Davie saw the delay as a scheme hatched by Bryson on behalf of the Irvings. In statements to Post Media, Irving has vehemently denied any involvement in the Norman matter or any attempt at political meddling. Others also apparently saw Bryson as the main instigator. Fraser would later tell Weisfield that former Conservative Defense Minister Peter MacKay, quote, "really let Bryson have it" over the delay when he saw the Treasury Board president during the security conference in Halifax. Quote, "Peter MacKay told Bryson to get his head out of his ass. Not sure it helped, but at least he did it," Fraser wrote. On the night of November 19th, Weisfield sent an email to company executives and lobbyists. Bryson's desire for a review of Project Resolve was strange, he said, that the deal had already been reviewed numerous times by independent agencies brought by the federal government, and the Inosia CEO is ready to play hardball. If it does transpire to be that, I will do a full-page plea in the Globe and Mail to Scott Bryson, asking that this Nova Scotia minister put his regional bias aside for matters of national security. Then I will lay off 400 guys next week. Early in the morning of November 20th, Norman sent an email to Fraser telling him that CBC reporter Cudmore had somehow obtained a copy of the Irving letter, quote, which shows they have been interfering. Norman was unhappy with the development. Irving could trace letter to me, assholes. They couldn't just leave it alone, Norman added, greedy and self-serving. At 5:34 Eastern Time that morning, CBC published an article by Cudmore revealing a cabinet committee had decided to delay Project Resolve for 2 months. Cudmore also reported that Irving had meddled in the decision by sending letters to cabinet ministers. That evening, Norman emailed Fraser to tell him that Trudeau's office and the Privy Council were having kittens over references to explicit cabinet discussions in Cudmore article, launching an investigation, UFB. Quote, they'll all be distracted from the actual capability gap as they execute a witch hunt for who quoted who, sigh. Fraser informed Norman that Davie was preparing to turn up the pressure. The company was going to inform Quebec Premier Philip Colliard that the shipyard would be closed and 1,200 people would be laid off, and that the company planned to sue the federal government. The plan made sense, Norman replied. He also noted that Irving officials had apologized to him, presumably for sending the letter to cabinet ministers. I played nice, but knew they were BSing me. It's personal and vindictive, Norman wrote. Later that day, Norman emailed a retired naval officer lamenting what he called Irving's intervention in the supply ship project. The situation, the Vice Admiral said, was demoralizing. They actually could care less about the work. They just want to block Davie from getting it. In Norman's view, that a delay would put the defense capabilities of the country and the welfare of the sailors at risk. Norman would later tell the same retired officer that he was ready to resign over the delay on Project Resolve. The blatant politics of this, and too many other similar files, is just beyond what should be reasonable, he explained. People just don't give a shit, and it actually hurts. Scrolling down. They basically got another article published, is what this says, and Fraser was very pleased with the new article. Shock and awe, baby, he wrote to Norman, but the Vice Admiral wasn't impressed. Cudmore is going to draw some really aggressive attention, Norman wrote. The source of that document will be investigated by the RCMP, and anyone associated with him will be part of their search. This is serious shit. Cudmore, now a senior advisor to the defense minister, Saijan, declined to comment for this story. Interesting little ladder that Mr. Cudmore's climbed, eh? Back to the article. Couillard phoned Trudeau to tell him, Prime Minister, the delay was unacceptable and was putting Quebec jobs at risk. The Shipbuilding Association of Canada released a statement questioning the Liberal decision, pointing out Davie won the project after, quote, an exhaustive industry solicitation process, and questioning whether Irving and C-SPAN, who were working on other federal vessels, had the capacity to take on a new project. Trudeau found himself taking questions from journalists about what he would do with the potential layoffs at Davie because of his government's decisions. Behind the scenes, the Liberal government was furious. The RCMP were called in to investigate the leak. Melissa Burke, an analysis at the Foreign and Defense Policy Secretariat at the PCO, would tell police the Navy had contacts with Davie and that Norman had once played golf with Fraser. Post Media has confirmed that Norman has never played golf with Fraser. Fraser does not play golf. Skipping down a bit. What turned out to be more of a limit on Liberals' desire for more due diligence, what changed their mind about the 2 months, was the penalty clause the Conservatives had inserted into the deal. Since Davie had purchased the ship using its own funds and had hired hundreds of workers, the federal government would be required to pay a penalty of $89 million if the project did not proceed. On November 30th, Saijan and Foote announced that the government had decided against the 2-month delay. The ministers pointed out that the asterisks had already been delivered to Davie and that workers were standing by. To restart the project and launch a competition would mean losing precious time in providing the Navy with a critical refueling and support capability. The ministers also acknowledged that the $89 million penalty. They all also acknowledged the $89 million penalty. Davie had the approval process with Project Resolve. The RCMP, meanwhile, were ramping up their investigation into who was originally behind the leak. Okay, so that is all of the preamble, believe it or not. We are just at the beginning, and man, this is a 20-minute video. So that's pretty unbelievable that this is a 20-minute video. So I'm going to stop this video here. This is all the preamble. This is all the setup work. This is what Davie Shipyard is. This is who Mark Norman is. And the next part is what the RCMP do to this poor man. And this is this story is incredible. This shouldn't be happening in Canada. They've maligned this guy because he did something politically they didn't like, and that was making sure they couldn't scuttle a supply ship. And he did that, and whether he was the one who leaked it, and I have all of these other tabs to tell you about, right? But man, this is a long video, so I want to stop it here. But there's no conclusive proof that he did what they're accusing him of doing. And what they're accusing him of doing is giving the information from the meeting that he was in Halifax for to the press and forcing the Trudeau government to follow through with Project Resolve. That's what he's essentially accused of. And I don't think they can prove that in court. So, man, this is part 1. I'm going to do part 2 right now, but if you want to watch part 2, please join me in the next part. Thanks for watching, everybody.